Today we hear the very powerful story of a blind man, born blind from his birth, living as a blind man on the margins and the peripheries of his society, a society that judged him and his parents as the cause of his own blindness, because they asked Jesus, so explain to us, why was this man born blind? What sin did his parents commit? And the Lord immediately refutes this idea that something his parents did brought about the blindness in their son. He refutes this transactional approach to our relationship with God. And he recenters it through this entire story. First, he heals the blind man. How does he heal the blind man? He takes soil from the ground, spits in it, and he creates clay, and he covers the eyes of the blind man. And that's a very important symbolic act, because in that moment Christ is showing that he is the creator, that he is the one that at the beginning took the elements and created human beings. And so by doing this again and putting mud on the eyes of the blind man, Christ is recreating, regenerating a human being. So many times in our own life, it's not uncommon that we begin our spiritual journey. We begin our walk towards Christ in a place of darkness for some people. And even if those of you that were blessed enough to grow up in families that loved the church and for whom prayer was central, and this is natural to you from your childhood years, even you have had or will have dark periods in your life. There will be problems. There will be darkness. And we see that in our walk with Christ, often it's this in and out of light and darkness that we experience. We live seeing Christ, hearing Christ, listening to the voice of Christ in our heart. And then something happens and we go blind. Something happens and we can't see these things anymore. And it's at those moments that today's story becomes important for us, that we reach out to Christ and we ask him to constantly recreate us, regenerate us, that we ask Christ to renew our own lives, because the spiritual life is not a static life. The spiritual life is not doing the same things over and over again. The spiritual life is experiencing the presence of God in your life in an ever more adventurous and deeper fashion. There's nothing static about that. So today's story teaches us to reach out to Christ as he reaches out to us, to allow him to renew us, to accept that only he can give us our spiritual sight, that only he can lead us out of dark places and narrow valleys where sometimes in life we feel imprisoned and trapped. Even from today's epistle reading, we have an example where St. Paul and St. Silas were thrown into prison on the charges of public disturbance because they preached to a young girl and her masters were not pleased with the outcome. And if you read from Acts of the Apostles that we read today, you'll see that even in prison, after having been beaten by rods, it says that St. Paul and St. Silas in the middle of the night were chanting hymns. So even in their physical pain and in their social humiliation, often even in our own physical pain or emotional pain or our own humiliation sometimes, we reach out and we look for Christ. And at those moments, he can renew us. He can recenter us. He can redirect us. And he can regenerate us.